So since I have company coming in from out of town this week, I'm going to try and record 2 episodes in the next couple of days. We'll see how that works. I got way too many thoughts and not enough time. And as usual, none of my thoughts are very well coordinated. Welcome to episode 3 of the AudioRising podcast from AudioRising.com. So at the end of last week's podcast, I said that I wanted to get into a place where I could unpack the idea behind being in a safe place. And I said I had a couple of analogies that I like to use. And anyone who's in recovery and has to deal with the concept of a higher power, maybe this will apply to you. There's plenty of sober people out there who go different directions, so not everybody's mind works the same way. So I'm hoping this is more inclusive rather than exclusive, which is exactly what I try to do with every word I say on here, is be inclusive, not exclusive. The easiest way to put my main analogy is to tell a story. And the first story starts when my stepson was about 5 or 6 years old. And I was inside my townhouse that we lived in at the time, looking out the Arcadia door across the park. It was a green belt that lined all of the little townhouses in our neighborhood. And he was out there with a bunch of his friends that were roughly the same age. And there had been these kids from the neighborhood across the street who were a little older, 12, 13 years old. And they used to try and come through our park. They would cut through our park going to and from Circle K or wherever. And there were times when they tried to intimidate the younger kids. And as someone who was tall and lanky and kind of awkward when I was a kid, I know what bullying is like. I know what being afraid is like. I know what being intimidated by other kids is like. And I know what my anxiety did to me back in those days with a very strong fight or flight instinct. I could see that if I engaged in physical battle with bullies, my what-if anxiety thinking would say, what if you get your butt kicked? What if you get your teeth knocked out? What if you get your ass handed to you? And when I was that age, that would cause me to take flight rather than fight in most cases. So anyway, I was very sensitive to this situation, and I tried to keep an eye on the kids when they were playing outside. And so these kids came through one day, and they've got this huge pit bull with them. Beautiful dog, but not something that I want my kid around. And they were having the dog come up to these kids who were sitting under a tree, innocent as can be, perfect picture of just hanging out at 5, 6, 7 years old. And, here's these pre-teens coming by with this dog you lay my kid down next to him and the dog's bigger. And they were, kind of egging the dog to kind of growl at the kids and this and that. And so where I'm standing is roughly maybe 100 yards away. And all I wanted in that moment when I witnessed this was for my kid to be on my side of the Arcadia door. That's all I wanted, was that glass in between him and that dog. And subsequently, I went out there. I took a handgun with me because those are legal out here. And I went out there kind of quietly, calmly, maybe not so much, tried to run the kids off. And I kept my hand behind my back with the gun there. And if he'd have turned this dog loose, I'd have killed him, just as sure as I'm sitting here. But the impression that I got afterwards was that intense feeling of wanting my boy on my side of that Arcadia door. And that feeling has never left me. And when I got into recovery, one of the things that was really impressed upon me, I believe by my higher power, was that when you're on that side of the Arcadia door, the dog can bark and snarl and snot and snort, and he can't easily get to you. He's got to go through that sheet of glass to be able to get to you. So you can observe him, and you can be afraid and you can be anxious, but you can observe him and his attack stance, if you will, and his snarl and his anger and his hatred and whatever else, but he can't touch you. Not with that Arcadia door in the way. Now that might seem like a silly analogy, but when you get into recovery, your higher power should be telling you, in my opinion, that it's okay to look at these things in your past, in your childhood, in your relationships of the past, in your schooling, in your classrooms, in your whatever it is that you're looking to recover from. You can go back as far as you can and observe it like I wanted him to observe that dog, with a protective sheet in front of you that's impenetrable because your higher power stands in the breach. And you're already living and reliving sometimes nightmares, sometimes daydreaming seems like kind of a candy-ass phrase to put on it. So I'll say you're looking at it with a morbid curiosity is what I've always called it in my own mind, where it's like a train wreck. You don't want to look at it, but you're compelled to. But you should be able to do that. And I would say, if you're working a recovery program and you have some ugly things, mild things, whatever they are, but I wouldn't suggest with some of the major PTSD issues and things like that, I wouldn't suggest doing it without a therapist, but maybe try to cultivate that thought in your mind. I can observe this without being touched by it again. And that's ugly and it's scary and it's hard, but it beats the alternative, which is to sit around and let this stuff continue to play on an endless loop in the back of your subconscious, and yet more than likely affecting every conscious decision you make. In my experience, these things don't go away. They compound upon each other, which is the reason why I self-medicated, to keep those demons away, to quiet my mind, I was thinking, to keep those thoughts away. And I'll get into some of my specific thoughts. You're going to see it a lot in the audio fiction that's being worked on right now. You're going to see it in one of the major characters. As best as I can portray it using sound only, which might be better, you're going to see what my mind sounded like. And that's kind of a complicated process. I'm trying to weed through that right now. So hopefully that'll be coming soon. Now on to the second topic. There is a common thought in recovery from specifically substance abuse, which I personally think can be taken even further into traits of codependency, upbringing, different types of childhood abuse, things like that. But I do know that it's commonly accepted in substance recovery circles that you are emotionally stunting your growth from the moment you start using regularly, I'll say, until the time you get sober. And in my experience, whether or not you're working a program or not, I was just reading someone's blog posting today. In fact, I'm going to look it up again because I want to give a shout out. But I was just reading today that there was so much more to be uncovered once the substance is out of your system. Sobriety is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a must-have thing. But at the same time, it does not stop there. Plenty of people out there, the old-fashioned term is called a dry drunk. They're not using, but they're not really working a program. They're not really, and for those of you who haven't done, quote-unquote, a program or a 12-step or something like that, I would just say, if you're not actively pursuing your recovery, let's put it that way. To me, recovery is, and I've spent a lot of years trying to come up with a visual for this. Think when you're a kid and you dig a big hole. You guys, when you're boys, I remember digging a huge hole in my friend's backyard. I mean, it was like we made basically a big, huge canyon to scale, and we had our little army men in it. So everything was to scale on these army men with the little green tanks and the little plastic bubbles that were on their head from the moldings. And we used to say, well, we need to hide in a cave. So then we would dig a cave. So you're going maybe, most of you guys probably know what I'm talking about. You go about 10, 12, 14 inches deep in somebody's backyard, which parents love, right? And then you start digging sideways. You start digging sideways and you create this little cave where your army men can hide out. And you start doing this, and then you get really good at it, and you think, well, I can start carving, these things. I can make it deeper. I could go back a foot, and if you get really ambitious, you might actually find yourself in one of them someday. But when you start carving a path of recovery, you're doing the same thing as if you were making one of those caves. You're carving out a road less traveled. You're carving out a new way of thinking. It's not like water running down the river. I heard one of those this week that was really good too. You're not going down the same old crevice, let's call it, or crevasse. You're carving a new direction. You're carving a new hole, and that takes extra effort. It's not just digging a hole. You're looking for direction now. You're cutting into an area that you haven't cut into before, and you're starting to carve a new path that you can go down. So if you, in whatever type of recovery you're in, if you're not continuing to carve out and tunnel your way down that new path, then you're just sitting in the old one and you stagnate. So I tend to look at this concept of emotionally stunting our growth as something that doesn't happen unless we work at it. I think some of it comes natural when we're sober, when we're abstinent from chemicals, and you start to grow because by definition you have to continue to deal with life as it is and not as we would have it. But I guess the way I look at it is a suspended emotional growth, suspended rather than stunted, and the clock stops until I get sober. And then when it does, that emotional growth begins to creep forward, but slowly. And so only by continuing to grow and tunnel away my new path in recovery can I increase that emotional growth. So if you minus the 22 years that I drank, I'm 27 emotionally, while I'm mentally and by way of life experience, I'm 49. And that doesn't mean that I'm not functional in my day-to-day life as far as being able to make decisions and, do this and do that. But I can tell you that by getting sober, I think that clock starts again on our emotional growth. And I think by continuing to invest in my recovery, again, it doesn't have to be 12-step, whatever it is that suits you, I think the best thing to do is keep in mind that whatever your recovery looks like, if you continue to invest in it while you're sober, now that you're sober, and you're going to stay that way, aren't you? While you're doing that, working your program increases that emotional growth. Okay, so I don't know where I'm at now. Science and math won't tell me anything about that. They don't take it that far. But I have noticed, and people around me have noticed, a continual emotional growth, whereas decisions I make on a deep level are different than the decisions I would have made while I was still drinking. Because to be quite honest, in the household I grew up in, not making decisions was a decision in itself. I think it was Rush that said, if you choose not to decide, you've still made a choice. And that is very true, because procrastination is another thing I'm working on recovery from. So you continue to grow in increments because you're sober, in another set of increments if you're working a program, if you're invested in your recovery, if you're continuing to grow in your sobriety. And if you're doing those two things, you're doubling the amount of emotional growth you'll have, because by nature, you have to make unmedicated decisions now. You have to make decisions as a human being was meant to. If you believe in evolution, then you're making naturally healthy decisions based on the way the human brain is, or the way the human brain has evolved to this point. If you believe in God, then you're making decisions absent of substances, so you are making your decisions by original design. Your brain is functioning by original design. And I know there's a lot more to this when it comes to different mental illnesses. I'm talking mostly about anxiety and some forms of depression and things like that. But think about that if you're in recovery or you're in the early stages of your sobriety or something like that, and people tell you, get over it, stop being so dramatic, stop acting like a child, grow up, quote unquote, all these things, you can say, well, now, wait a minute. There is a factually based reason that I'm reacting that way. Don't just throw it out and say, oh, yeah, you suck, I hate you, you're calling me a child, F off. I don't mean that. I mean, be willing to look at it and go, okay, it's possible that I am doing that, and there's a reason why. It's because you're emotionally much younger than you are physically, quite honestly, intellectually. I mean, you can be the most book smart person on the planet and behave like a 9-year-old. And I'm speaking to myself as I say this, even though I don't always act 9, and I am not the most book smart person in the world. And I think most of us fall into that category where we're halfway between those two extremes. So that's just something to put in your hip pocket and think about once in a while and say, maybe I am acting like a child. And there's a good psychological, scientific reason for that. It's not an excuse. It's because I've stunted myself. I suspended my emotional growth. And I tend to break things down in my own mind because my mind is so chaotic. I have to break things down into increments. So I break a human person down into 4 increments. It's physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional for me. Like I say, I don't even have a college degree, so what do I know, right? But that's how I break it down in my own mind in order to be able to process things. I ask myself, is this a spiritual issue? Is this a physical issue? Or is it emotional? Not mental, emotional. And those 4 overlap a lot.
Stand by to receive our transmission.
2 shout-outs this week, and I'm not going to hover over them or comment on them right now because I get a little emotional sometimes. So I'm just going to say, check out at Surviving My Past and also at Tammy Harper Wynn, and that's spelled TamiHarperWinn. When you go to their Twitter feeds, you are going to find their blogs. Go read them. Just do yourself a huge favor. Follow them and go read them. That's Tammy Harper Wynn and Surviving My Past. And those are both on Twitter. And this week, I will leave you with that. See you next time.
Opening music by Dream Theater. The song The Mirror from the album Awake. Sound effects and background music by Incompetech.com and Free Sound. Ending music by Terry Chisholm and Walking with Kings. This is a production of AudioRising.com 2016.